They tried to tear down my career, oblivious to the fact that I was the one holding their world together. My family, the people who were supposed to cheer me on, plotted to ruin everything I'd built, not knowing I was the one signing their paychecks. What started as a betrayal became my moment to rewrite the story they'd forced on me for years. My name is Lena Carter. Though in the corporate world, I go by L, a name I chose to keep things vague. I'm 34, the Chief Strategy Officer at Nova Pulse, a medical tech company based in Seattle, Washington. It's a role I earned through sleepless nights and relentless hustle. But what my family didn't know, what they couldn't even fathom, was that this spring, I quietly became the majority shareholder of Nova Pulse. Through a web of investments I started weaving in my early 20s. I'd taken control of the company they thought I was just lucky to work for. It all began with a secret I kept close, a truth I buried under layers of humility and silence. I wasn't just a strategist climbing the corporate ladder, I was the one who owned the ladder itself. And when my brother Ethan, the golden child of our family, decided to sabotage me, he had no idea he was targeting the person who held all the cards. My parents, always dazzled by his charm, didn't question his motives. They never did, but I was ready. I'd been preparing for this moment longer than they could imagine. This isn't just a story of revenge. Though I won't lie, there's a certain satisfaction in watching the truth unfold. It's about taking back the narrative when the people closest to you try to write you out of it. My family thought they could dim my light, but they didn't know I was the one powering the whole damn show. And by the time they realized it, I'd already made a move that would change everything, a move they never saw coming. 15 years ago, I was just a kid with big dreams and a laptop that barely worked. I was the first in our family to go to college, scraping by at UCLA on scholarships and late-night shifts at a campus lab. I was double majoring in biotechnology and business administration, fueled by a vision to revolutionize healthcare with technology. While my classmates partied, I was coding health apps in a dorm room so small my desk doubled as a nightstand. Every line of code, every pitch I practiced in front of a cracked mirror, was a step towards something bigger. I knew where I was headed, even if no one else did. Meanwhile, my older brother Ethan, 2 years my senior, was the family's shining star. At 36 now, he was 21 back then, already flunking out of his third startup idea. He'd pitch some flashy tech concept to anyone who'd listen, promising to be the next big thing. But his plans always fizzled out, too much talk, not enough follow-through. Our parents, though, ate it up. Ethan's a visionary, Dad would say, his voice brimming with pride. He's just finding his way. Mom would nod, framing yet another photo of Ethan at some networking event, his grin wide and confident. Me? I was the stable one, which was their polite way of saying I wasn't worth the spotlight. Stable didn't mean supported. I paid my own tuition, juggled 2 jobs, and built my first health tech prototype from scratch, a clunky app that tracked patient vitals for small clinics. I pitched it at underground startup meetups, the kind where nobody takes a college kid seriously. Ethan, on the other hand, was off pitching his latest game changer in Silicon Valley. Funded by Mom and Dad's savings. When his ventures tanked, they'd cushion his fall with more money, more encouragement. When I landed my first internship at a biotech firm, Mom said, "That's nice, Lena, but don't overwork yourself." Dad just changed the subject to Ethan's next big idea. I stayed quiet, focused. I didn't need their applause. By 27, I'd launched and sold my first startup, a platform for remote patient monitoring. For $70 million, I funneled the money through a maze of LLCs and trusts, keeping my name off everything. 2 years later, I sold my second startup, a wearable device for early disease detection, for $200 million. Again, I stayed in the shadows. Why the secrecy? Because my family never believed in me. They'd call my work cute or technical stuff, dismissing it while bragging about Ethan's latest flop disguised as a consulting gig. I let them think I was still scraping by, living in a modest apartment, pinching pennies. It was easier that way. The truth was, I was building an empire. Every deal, every investment, was a brick in the foundation of something unstoppable. I joined Nova Pulse, a medical tech company in Seattle, 18 months ago as a senior strategist. It was undervalued, brimming with potential, but struggling to scale. I saw my chance. I poured my energy into restructuring their operations, streamlining their tech, and landing partnerships with major hospitals. My strategies worked. Nova Pulse started turning heads in the industry. Within a year, I was promoted to Chief Strategy Officer. The board praised my vision. But my family? They barely noticed. At Sunday dinners, Mom would gush about Ethan's new role at some startup he'd sweet-talked his way into. "He's managing a whole team now," she'd say, passing the mashed potatoes. Ethan would lean back, smirking, tossing out buzzwords like disruptive innovation. Dad would nod, impressed. I'd mention a new project at Nova Pulse, and they'd brush it off. "Sounds complicated, Lena," Dad once said. "You sure you're not in over your head?" Ethan would chuckle, like my job was some hobby I'd outgrow. I'd smile, sip my coffee, and let them underestimate me. I'd learned long ago that their approval wasn't worth chasing. What they didn't know was that I'd been working on something bigger than a promotion. Nova Pulse wasn't just my workplace, it was my chessboard. I'd spent years quietly investing, building a network of holding companies and blind trusts. When the opportunity came to take Nova Pulse private, I seized it. By the time I was named Chief Strategy Officer, I wasn't just leading the company's vision. I owned it, and that was a secret I kept locked away, waiting for the right moment to reveal. When the board at Nova Pulse named me Chief Strategy Officer, it felt like the culmination of every late night, every rejection, every moment I'd pushed forward while my family looked the other way. At 34, I was leading the strategic vision for a company that was reshaping medical tech, building devices and software that saved lives. The announcement came with a corner office, a title that carried weight, and a chance to steer Nova Pulse into a new era. I was proud, but I didn't expect my family to throw me a parade. Still, I wasn't prepared for how quickly their indifference turned to resentment. It was a Sunday dinner, the kind where Mom's roast was overcooked and Dad's stories about his old sales days dragged on. I mentioned my promotion, keeping it casual, hoping for a flicker of recognition. Mom paused, fork in midair, and said, "That's nice, Lena, but don't let it go to your head. Those big jobs come with big stress." Dad gave a half smile, like I just told him I'd won a raffle. Ethan, though, leaned back in his chair, his smirk sharp enough to cut glass. "Chief Strategy Officer, huh? Must be nice to catch a break like that. Just don't trip over your own ego running a company you didn't build." His tone was all charm, but the jab landed hard. I nodded, stirring my coffee, letting the moment pass. I'd learned to pick my battles. What they didn't know, what I kept locked in an encrypted file on my laptop, was that I hadn't just climbed the ladder at Nova Pulse, I'd bought it. Over the past year, I'd orchestrated a silent takeover. Nova Pulse was undervalued, its stock languishing despite its groundbreaking tech. I saw the potential and acted. Through a maze of holding companies, blind trusts, and offshore entities I'd built since my 20s, I acquired controlling interest in the company. Not a single document tied back to Lena Carter. When the board promoted me, they thought they were rewarding a brilliant strategist. They had no idea they were handing the title to the owner. I'd kept it secret for a reason. My family thrived on appearances, not truth. Ethan, especially, couldn't stand being outshone. At 36, he'd bounced from one failed startup to another, each collapse blamed on bad timing or incompetent partners. Yet Mom and Dad still treated him like a prodigy, hanging on his every word. My promotion flipped that script. And Ethan hated it. His charm, his confidence, his status as the family's golden boy, it all hinged on me staying in the background. I was the quiet one, the one with too many degrees and boring tech projects. But now, I was stepping into the spotlight, and he couldn't handle it. At first, his sabotage was subtle. He started showing up at Nova Pulse, claiming he was in the area and wanted to support his little sister. I'd watch from my office as he schmoozed with department heads over coffee, laughing too loudly, dropping hints that I was under a lot of pressure, or still figuring things out. He'd flash that winning smile, the one that always worked on mom and dad, and the senior staff would nod politely. I let it slide, curious to see how far he'd go. Then the anonymous reports started. HR flagged complaints about my qualifications, claims that my degrees were unverified, that my resume had gaps, that I'd fudged my experience to land the promotion. It was all nonsense, easily debunked with a quick check of my records. But the intent was clear. Ethan wanted to chip away at my credibility. I confronted him one evening, keeping my voice calm. If you've got something to say, Ethan, say it to my face. He leaned in, all mock concern. I'm just looking out for you. Lena, you know how it is. Companies love fast-tracking women for the optics. I'd hate to see you crash and burn. His eyes gleamed with something uglier than sibling rivalry. I smiled, said nothing, and walked away. I wasn't ready to show my hand yet. But Ethan wasn't done. He was just warming up. And I could feel the storm brewing. He didn't know that every move he made was being watched. Every word he whispered was being noted. I'd spent years building my empire in the shadows. And I wasn't about to let my brother's jealousy unravel it. What he also didn't know was that I'd already made a move bigger than he could imagine, one that would turn his world upside down when the time came. I just needed him to keep pushing, to give me the stage I'd been waiting for. And trust me, he didn't disappoint. Ethan's subtle jabs were one thing, but I knew he wouldn't stop at coffee chats and whispered doubts. He was too invested in being the family's star, too threatened by my rise at Nova Pulse. I'd seen that glint in his eyes before, when I got into UCLA and he brushed it off. When I landed my first biotech internship and he called it cute. But this time, his jealousy wasn't just petty sibling rivalry. It was calculated, and he was playing for keeps. It started with a folder, sleek and professional, delivered anonymously to the board of Nova Pulse. Inside was a masterclass in deception, forged emails suggesting I'd leaked proprietary data, doctored bank records implying I'd siphoned company funds, even a fabricated timeline claiming I'd misrepresented my role in past projects. The accusations were wild: embezzlement, fraud, incompetence. Whoever put it together had done their homework, weaving just enough truth to make the lies seem plausible. I knew it was Ethan. No one else had the motive or the audacity. The board called an emergency meeting for Monday, and Ethan couldn't hide his glee. At our family dinner the night before, he was practically glowing, his usual smirk dialed up to a full grin. Heard there's a big meeting at Nova Pulse tomorrow, he said, cutting into his steak. Sounds like they're shaking things up at the top. Mom clapped her hands, like she was at a theater show. Oh, that's exciting. About time they got serious, she said, oblivious to the fact that the shake-up was aimed at me. Dad raised his glass, toasting to nothing in particular. Neither of them asked why I wasn't invited to a meeting about my own job. They never did. I sat there, stirring my soup, watching them revel in Ethan's vague triumph. It stung, I won't lie, not because I needed their approval, I'd outgrown that years ago, but because their blindness to Ethan's malice was so absolute. They didn't see me, not really. To them, I was still the quiet kid who'd never outshine their golden boy. But they were about to learn just how wrong they'd been. While they toasted, I was already 3 steps ahead. That night, I stayed up until dawn in my home office, surrounded by stacks of evidence I'd been collecting for weeks. Ethan thought he was clever. But he wasn't invisible. I had emails he'd sent to colleagues, fishing for dirt on me. I had voicemails he'd left for a board member, casually questioning my leadership. I had text messages he'd sent to an old coworker, asking them to dig into my past projects. Every move he made, I'd documented, color-coded, and cross-referenced. I wasn't just building a defense, I was crafting a takedown. But the real ace up my sleeve wasn't just about Nova Pulse. It was bigger, bolder, and something Ethan would never see coming. A few months ago, I'd quietly acquired Tech Trend Innovations, the company where Ethan had worked 3 years prior, his last big break, before they fired him for mismanaging a project. I'd bought it through the same web of holding companies that hid my ownership of Nova Pulse. Tech Trend was struggling, but I saw its potential. Just like I'd seen Nova Pulse's. I hadn't planned to use it against Ethan. Not at first, but now, it was the perfect card to play. I spent that night finalizing 2 dossiers. The first was a detailed breakdown of Ethan's sabotage, every forged document, every whispered lie, every attempt to undermine me. The second was the ownership structure of Nova Pulse, proving I wasn't just the chief strategy officer, I was the one who owned the company. I added one more file. A wildcard, the acquisition agreement for Tech Trend Innovations. Signed and sealed in my name. If Ethan wanted to play dirty, I'd show him what it meant to lose at his own game. As the sun rose, I leaned back in my chair, a cup of cold coffee in hand. I should have felt angry, betrayed, maybe even heartbroken. My own brother was trying to destroy everything I'd built, and my parents were cheering him on. But instead, I felt calm, focused. Ethan's schemes hadn't broken me, they'd given me a stage. For years, I'd stayed in the shadows, letting my family believe I was less than I was. Now, I was ready to step into the light and show them who I really was. Monday's meeting wasn't going to be their victory lap. It was going to be mine. Monday morning arrived like a storm I'd been waiting to face. I walked into Nova Pulse at 7:30. A black coffee in one hand, my leather portfolio in the other. The office was quiet, the kind of hush that comes before everything changes. I'd spent the weekend preparing, but now it was time to play the hand I'd been holding for years. Ethan thought he'd orchestrated my downfall. My parents thought they were here to watch me fall. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The board meeting was set for 9 a.m. sharp. I'd sent a message to the directors at midnight. A brief note with attachments they'd need to review. They knew I'd be there, even if Ethan didn't. At 8:45, I watched from my office window as Ethan swept into the lobby. His tailored suit crisp, his grin wide. Mom and Dad trailed behind him, dressed like they were attending a gala. "Is the board ready?" Ethan asked the receptionist, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who thought he'd already won. They were ushered to the executive wing, the directors following with faces like stone. I straightened my blazer, took a deep breath, and stepped into the hallway. The moment had arrived. The boardroom was tense when I walked in, the air thick with anticipation. Margaret Chen, our board chair, was mid-sentence, her voice clipped. "These allegations against Ms. Carter are gravely serious." Ethan sat at the far end of the table, his smirk barely contained. Mom clutched her purse, eyes darting nervously. Dad stared at his hands. Avoiding my gaze, I slid into the chair at the head of the table, my movements deliberate. "Sorry for the delay," I said, my tone light but firm. "Let's get started." Ethan's head snapped up, his smugness cracking. "Lena, this is a closed session," he hissed. "You weren't invited." I clasped my hands, meeting his stare with a calm smile. "Actually, I invited myself. It's hard to hold a board meeting without the owner of the company. Don't you think?" The room went silent, like the air had been sucked out. Ethan's face drained of color. Mom blinked rapidly, as if she'd misheard. Dad's jaw tightened, his knuckles white. "What are you talking about?" Ethan spat. "Nova Pulse is publicly traded. You don't own it." "It was," I said, nodding to my assistant, Sarah, who stepped forward with a sleek portfolio. "Until 3 months ago, when it was acquired by Horizon Core Holdings." I paused, letting the words sink in. "Care to guess who owns that?" Sarah handed out copies of the ownership documents, the pages rustling as the directors flipped through them. Gasps rippled across the table. Some had heard rumors of a buyout, but no one knew the silent trust behind it was mine. Now they did. "This is ridiculous," Ethan stammered, his voice rising. "You're a strategist, Lena, a glorified number cruncher. You couldn't pull this off." I tilted my head, unfazed. "I've heard that before. You've said it enough times." I turned to Sarah. "Please." She tapped her tablet, and Ethan's voice filled the room, cold and cutting. "Lena's not built for leadership," he said in one clip, recorded during a lunch with a colleague. "She's smart, but she'll crack under pressure." Another clip played. "If we're honest, she's only there because of diversity quotas." The temperature in the room dropped. No one moved. "And then there's this," I said, holding up the folder Ethan had sent to the board. Forged emails, fake bank records, a whole story spun out of desperation. Embezzlement? Fraud? You thought no one would check? I slid the folder across the table. Character defamation, falsified evidence, sabotage of a senior executive. Did you really think this would hold up? Ethan sank into his chair, his confidence unraveling. I was protecting the company. He muttered, his voice cracking. You're not qualified. You're just Lena. No, Ethan, I said softly, I'm the one who earned this. And I'm the one exposing you for endangering this company's future. Mom's voice broke the silence. Fragile and pleading. Lena, you can't ruin your brother's life over this. I turned to her, my gaze steady, like he didn't try to ruin mine? Like you didn't show up here expecting to watch me fail? Dad raised a hand, half-hearted. We were just supporting Ethan. I locked eyes with him. You've always backed the wrong kid. I stood, addressing the board. I apologize for the drama. But you needed to see the stakes. Ethan Carter has crossed ethical and legal lines to remove me. He's risked Novapulse's reputation and stability. Margaret cleared her throat. Miss Carter, what do you propose? I sat, folding my hands. First, dismiss all allegations against me based on verified evidence. Second, take immediate disciplinary action against Ethan for misconduct. Third, send a formal letter to his current and former employers, detailing his actions with evidence. Then came the twist. One more thing, I said, sliding another folder across the table. This is the acquisition agreement for Tech Trend Innovations. Ethan's old company. I bought it 2 months ago. Ethan's eyes widened, his breath catching. You, what? I leaned forward. I own Tech Trend now. And I'll make sure they know exactly why you were fired the first time, and why you'll never work there again. The room was stunned. Ethan looked like he'd been punched. Lena, you'll destroy me, he whispered, voice shaking. Like you tried to destroy me? I asked, my tone razor sharp. The difference is, I have proof. You had lies and hope. I turned to the board. Finally, I request that Ethan and my parents be banned from Novapulse property. Any interference will face legal consequences. Mom sobbed, mascara streaking. We're family, Lena. I gave a bitter laugh. Family doesn't tear you down out of jealousy. I slid one last folder forward. This is the sale agreement for my first startup. Sold for $70 million when I was 27. The second, $200 million 2 years later. I looked at Dad. I could have bought your dream lake house. Paid for Ethan's endless ventures. But I didn't. I wanted to see who'd stand by me when they thought I had nothing. I glanced at Ethan, pale and silent. You all chose wrong. I gathered my papers and stood. This meeting is adjourned. As I reached the door, Ethan's voice broke. Lena, please. I was jealous. I couldn't stand you winning. His eyes were glassy, pride gone. We can fix this, right? We're family. I turned back, my voice steady. When you thought I was nothing, you pushed me lower. When I was thriving, I stayed quiet so you wouldn't feel small. That's the difference between us. I walked out, leaving them to face the truth. The days after the board meeting felt like the calm after a hurricane. The board acted swiftly, dismissing Ethan's accusations against me with a unanimous vote. They sent letters to his current employer and Tech Trend Innovations, laying out his misconduct with the evidence I'd provided, recordings, forged documents, the works. By the end of the week, Ethan was let go from his latest startup gig. Word spread fast in Seattle's tech scene. And his name, once a golden ticket, became a cautionary tale. My parents left voicemails, their voices trembling with apologies and excuses. I listened, but I didn't call back. I wasn't ready. I should have felt triumphant, but mostly I felt tired. For years, I'd carried the weight of my family's dismissal. Their belief that I'd always be less than Ethan. Exposing their betrayal didn't erase that ache, it just made it real. I threw myself into work, steering Novapulse through new partnerships and product launches. The company was thriving, but late at night, staring at the Seattle skyline from my office, I wondered if I'd ever outrun the need for their approval. Maybe I didn't have to. Maybe I was enough. 3 months later, I was finishing a late strategy session when my assistant, Sarah, buzzed in. Someone's here for you. Says it's personal. I walked to the lobby, bracing myself. It was Ethan, but not the polished, self-assured Ethan I knew. His suit was gone, replaced by a plain sweater and jeans. His face was drawn, the bravado stripped away. I won't stay long, he said, holding up a hand. I just need to say something. He stepped forward and placed a USB drive on the reception desk. This has everything, passwords, emails, contacts I used to hurt you. I'm sending statements to the board and my old company. Owning up to it all. No excuses. I studied him, searching for the catch. Why now? I asked, my voice quiet but firm. He looked down, his shoulders sagging. Because you were right. I wasn't building anything. You were. And I hated you for it. I thought if I could take you down, I'd feel like I was still the one who mattered. He paused, his voice breaking. Letting me fall showed me more than all the years mom and dad propped me up. He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. I'm starting over. Entry-level job at a small firm. No fake titles this time. I don't expect you to care. But I needed you to know. I stood there, the USB drive cold in my hand. Part of me wanted to let him walk away into oblivion. But something stopped me. Ethan, I called softly. He turned, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Send me your resume in a year. I said, not for a corner office. But if you're serious about earning your way up. We're always looking for people willing to start small. His eyes glistened, a single tear escaping. He nodded, no words, just a quiet acknowledgement, and left without looking back. 6 months later, Nova Pulse was soaring. We'd launched a new line of diagnostic wearables, expanded into 4 states, and created hundreds of jobs across the Northwest. The company was mine, not just in name, but in impact. It was real, lasting, and it was everything I dreamed of. My parents still texted now and then, usually when they wanted something or when they bragged about their visionary daughter at country club dinners they once hoped I'd stay out of. I kept my replies short, civil, distant. The validation I'd craved for so long? I didn't need it anymore. Last month, a card arrived in the mail. No long plea, no guilt trip, just a note in Ethan's handwriting. You didn't succeed because of us. But in spite of us, I'm learning to build something real now. Thank you. I read it twice, then tucked it into a drawer. I didn't need to forgive him. Not yet, but I didn't need to carry the anger either. I'd found something better, peace. The kind that comes when you stop waiting for others to see your worth and start seeing it yourself. Thank you for listening to my story. For seeing me when those closest to me couldn't. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been the one everyone underestimated? The one who worked quietly, pushed through, and waited for your moment? Maybe you faced a family that didn't believe in you. Or a betrayal that made you question your worth. What did you do? Did you fight back, stay silent, or walk away? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm reading every one. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and ring the bell to follow my journey and honor your own. Because here's what I've learned. Resilience doesn't need a cheering crowd. It just needs you to keep believing in yourself. Success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you were always right to trust your heart. So, what's your story? Let's make this space a place where we lift each other up. I can't wait to hear from you.